Welcome to another youth-centered podcast. I'm extremely excited to have our guest today, the one and only Lester Rugg. We know Lester as a senior citizen who actually comes in, is part of the walking group here at the youth center. That's how we first met him. And he is a guy that walks through the door with a great smile every day. And I know everybody here at the youth center loves to see Lester. And we're actually titling this one today with Lester, Enthusiasm for Life. So first of all, Lester, thanks for coming on the Youth-Centered Podcast.
I'm well aware of what you have as implication of what I can offer. More than anything, I think probably you asked, where did I come from?
Yeah, if you could give us a little bit of a bio. Who is Lester Rugg?
I'll be happy to do that. I was born in Los Angeles, in what was called the Barrio, which is East Los Angeles. It's where the Poles, the Latino community is now, where we had a Jewish community as well. It was a melting pot, not far different from, say, Lawrence in some ways.
Sure.
I grew up, though, in the hinterland, inland, where what was once known as the Virginia Dare Winery, the largest winery in the world in those days.
Wow.
So I was part of a farm community as well as a city boy as well. So I had a cross section of things that I've done. I know you asked me, what have I done in the way of life's experiences here. I've done a lot of stuff that I'm going. I don't want to feel like I'm crowing or anything like that.
No, we want you to tell it. This is one of the reasons we brought you on. So
it's a strange one, and I'll try to formulate some concept that's something of my philosophy as much as anything else. I like to feel like there's a joy to life, and in part it's also a respect for other individuals. And some way or another, if I walk through the door, I feel like I want to convey that feeling of a smile, hail fellow, well met. And if I do this, it's not a thing about, well, I'm here and I'm on stage and I'm going to be doing all these things. I just want a feeling of warmth that people are accept me and I accept them in the same regard. Just a respect for the individual, and I guess that's governed my entire life in a way. You may want to ask some other questions.
Yeah, let's start with, so you were born in Los Angeles. Talk a little bit about Lester, college, post-college, some of your first work experiences.
I spent half of my life, I think, in the educational environment. I love college. I really did. I was just an average student in high school. My mother did insist that let's do a college preparatory program because I would like to see you go further. I always had an interest in art, and I would doodle little things.
Sure.
And at any rate, that was one of my earlier directions as far as studies were concerned. I went to junior college initially because in some ways even then, college was kind of financially a real issue.
Sure, a stretch.
So so my strategy was to cut my costs where possible, and I attended Chaffee High School, which had a junior college on the campus. So it was an easy transition to make. It wasn't like I had to travel miles to get anywhere initially. Yeah, that in itself was part of an experience of the farm boy, and part of the smarts of a city fellow. Anyway, I majored in art and minored in education actually, because I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But I thought in the back of my mind, I might, eventually go into education, because later I transferred to Cal State LA, which was a teaching institution, not far different from, say, Lowell's program.
Sure.
A long time ago. So anyway, here I am. Can't seem to get out of school because I enjoyed just the fun, the laughter, the seriousness of the moment. I wasn't an exceptional student by any means, but I kept my grades up and just kept working from there. Along came the Korean War, and I naturally was elected to serve in some capacity, which I did. And I served in the Army, worked with the Corps of Engineers, and didn't go overseas, actually. I had a lot of friends of mine that did. Some didn't return, for
Sure.
that matter. But that's life, and it's kind of like you get in a car and you're not sure it could happen to anyone anywhere.
Absolutely.
And in this instance, that was a good experience for me there, because it lended itself to other things that I did later. The thing about it is, I've done so many stuff of various sorts here, and it isn't a matter of crowing or anything else. It's just part of life's experience.
Sure.
If I'm chattering away like crazy, let me stop for a minute and give me a couple directions.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question off the line. I just found out your wife. I've never met your wife, because I see you. You come to the youth center and the walking club by yourself, and I've seen you on the TV.
We should have had her come down and join us.
We should. So I want to talk a little bit about that. That you told me off the record when you met the love of your life and your best friend, and you're still married to this day. One of our high school kids asked this question. What's the secret of a long marriage? So talk a little bit about your wife and the fact that to this day you're 89 years old and you're still together. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm not quite together these days. I got down on the ground, and I'm going, it's a little hard for me to get up now. Things that I used to be able to do and take for granted I could do. They're physically not the same.
Sure.
Life changes as you progress through, the first part of your life, your middle age as well, and advanced age. More than anything else, though, I remember a professor asking, what is the secret to, success in a way? It's a life that is good to lead. And that stuck with me, at the time. I didn't quite understand it at all. But some way or another, I tell you, it's been is backbone of my existence. And I've tried initially to examine things along those lines. One of the things that I think that all of us should be, conscious of, life is fleeting. Make the most of it when you can, because there's going to come a time when it's not so easy to do.
Sure. So this love of your life you met, you said she was from Methuen?
She is.
And how did you guys meet?
Well, it's my second marriage, truthfully.
Okay.
I married a firebrand, and there was some dissension. She was a good soul, too, as well. She just recently passed away. She was 93 years old. She was a little older than I at the time. And met my wife initially when I was overseas working with a military program. I'm jumping around.
That's all right. Go right ahead.
Yeah, but I wanted to travel, and initially I saw an announcement in one of our magazines, because I was an art major. I majored in arts and crafts
Sure.
and a number of things there. The thing was, they wanted volunteers to work with a military program in recreation. So this was with the DoD, the Department of Defense, and it was a Army recreation program, special services all over the world. And I devoted about 6 years to this as well, undertaking training with them. As a crafts director, I was responsible for a number of people and a number of installations. My prior military experience had a lot to do with making it a success for me. Probably one of my my major things. But I'm getting away from what was the original question.
Yeah, let's talk about that lovely life. Yes.
I had a good friend that said, "I want you to meet the Boston Bean. I'm going to have a bean party, and I want you to come down from." I was stationed in Bavaria at that time, and before that I was stationed in France. I should keep things in some sort of order here. At any rate, not to jump around too much. So I attended this party, and this young lady came up the stairs, and I was enraptured with this girl from the day that I met her. And she was never really completely out of my mind by any means there. She taught for the American dependent schools, which is all it's all over the world in a sense, and another avenue for people to consider. It was a great experience for her. She was a small town girl, and from a Lebanese background. And why do you want to go to Europe? You should be right here. So anyway, she wanted to break away from the mold, and that's how she became a part of this other existence here. She also broke away and came back to the United States, and so that was my initial experience with long-distance relationships. I continued writing to her and things there. I was really taken by this girl, to say the least. And she has written, works with a program of memoirs. A group of elderly ladies get together, and they combine their experiences, and each of them write a chapter each week and present it to the rest of them in a discussion and things like this.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. So we're still active, and she literally has been working on the chronological order of our lives as we experienced it. It's a love story, to say the least.
Absolutely.
And different people have. So maybe at another time, if people are interested, we can invite her to join us and ask, how did you meet Lester?
I definitely will. Let me ask you, how many years have you been married?
It's going on 11 years now.
11 years now.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
As your second marriage.
Second
Wow.
marriage, yeah.
Awesome. Let me get to a few other questions.
Sure.
So I do want to let our listeners know. Our questions for Lester came from our kids and our staff, and they had a real interest in hearing from someone as experienced as Lester in life, and that's where these questions came from. So What was the most influential moment of your life? As you recap now, almost 89 years, is there one influential moment or are there numbers? Can you give us a little insight on that?
You'll love this. Initially, I was an electrician's apprentice, and I worked on a construction site, which was the San Fernando High School in Los Angeles. And a electrical panel slipped out of my, these are big things there.
Sure.
Slammed down on my toe. That was the end of that particular avenue. And so my poor father, he really wanted me to follow in his footsteps there, because he'd been an electrician all his life, and he had a very colorful life too as well. And so at any rate, that took care of that part.
And that sent you in a different direction.
Now I've lost my thread, so if you would repeat the question.
Well, just what were some of the influential moments in your life? So obviously dropping an electrical panel on your toe ended your career of being in the electrical field, but what were some maybe, over your years, some moments that maybe happened that were extremely influential to your life?
Surprisingly enough, the military had a real impact upon me, and I think it helped to formulate some direction to my life as well. And
how many years total in the military?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, 2 years active, and what a total of 7 years altogether.
Okay.
And of course, if you think about I always think of it as my second tour when I worked for the Department of Defense.
Defense, correct.
And I put about 6 years in with them too as well. And at any rate, like you had asked earlier, what was your job history or whatever it is? I did a lot of stuff. That's the only way
you
that
actually
I could
told
put
me
it.
offline that in preparing for this, you really kind of sat down and said, wow, I've done a lot of different things. Let me ask you this question. This came from another one of our high school kids. As you look back at your life right now, who were your biggest mentors in growing up?
I thought about that for a moment. I hope my voice is not fading.
Oh, no, not at all.
Yeah. I had a high school teacher. He taught English, and we would meet sometimes at lunchtime and share, because he was the he was the sponsor for the local chess club. In those days, I used to play chess.
Sure.
30 minutes and out. Never quite got a real mastery of it by any means. But we were talking afterwards, and I said, I'll never go to college. And he looked at me straight in the eye, and he said, you have the capability of doing it. And that in itself probably was the greatest encouragement of all.
Because he believed in you.
He believed in me, yeah. And even though I was just an average student,
Sure.
but I had the capability of doing more. I was always curious about a lot of things. I love to read, and if you can believe this, I tried reading the Tale of the Arabian Nights when I was in the third grade.
Sure.
And some people would be familiar with this, but at any rate, I was always curious about just various aspects of history and travel, and just things in general. I was curious. I guess that was part of it there. But this thing about I'll never be able to go to college, I think that in itself gave me a feeling that, well, it is possible.
Yeah.
and it is attainable.
It's the
And-
power of belief, right? And this person believed
it
in
really
you.
is there. And I went on from there. I went to junior college in East Los Angeles, and I couldn't get away. So I ended up, I was there for 3 years. It's like I was a perennial student. uh, I think it was my security blanket, in truth.
Sure.
Looking back and looking at some of the pictures in the yearbook and what have you, I was a fun lover. Had a good time, to say the least. But we had an individual. He was head of the art department. His background was medical illustrator, and then there were a couple others as well that also gave me some direction as far as just accumulation of experience. And I looking back, they kept pushing me somewhere or another, and you should go on. And so I transferred from there to Cal State LA,
Sure.
which I graduated from, and I majored in art, and also joined a fraternity in those days. So there was the social order of things.
Sure.
And couldn't get away from there either. So I put in extra time. I think my biggest problem was that I was just a perennial student. It was my security blanket.
Absolutely.
And I did lots of little odd jobs. I must have worked for at least 4 or 5 different library programs throughout the city and adjacent areas there to supplement my income. And then I also worked on campus too. You'll love this. I was parking cars at night.
There you go. Let me switch up gears a little bit. Another person asked this question here. If we interviewed Lester's friends, how would they describe you?
I think probably outgoing and warm-hearted and a good word for everyone. I think that's probably the closest description in my eyes, at any rate. That doesn't mean theirs would be the same way. He's a son of gun, he's no good, he's whatever. I hope that's not the case, because...
Well, we see that every day when you come into the youth center. You have that just great attitude. It could be raining out, it could be snowing out, and you're always saying hello and wishing everybody a good day. One of our high school kids wants to know, do you or did you have a bucket list?
I did and I didn't. I think was it my bucket list was initially was to be successful. The other was a direction to my efforts in achieving this. So one of the things involved was that work with no play is no fun at all either, and yet these are things that you need to do. And I have to say that during my college days I went to a teaching program more than anything else. So naturally I'm going to become a teacher. And I went through the program in California. It was an extensive one, and so the preparation was something that took special care, because they were concerned about the quality of education in those days. Things have changed a little bit since then, because politics seems to have entered into our form of education here. Not that I want to get on a soapbox and talk one way or the other about this, but at any rate, that was the direction that I pursued. And I did many other things too as well.
Sure. You told me today that, and I didn't have you for, you say you're almost 89. I didn't peg you for 89. You have such a vibrant life about you and everything else. One of our high school kids wanted to know, and you joked about this. We said, we'll see you Thursday for the podcast. And you said to me and Demi, you said, God willing, I'll be here. And at 89 years old, what would you like to do for the rest of your days? What are some of the things you'd like to still maybe accomplish at your age?
Early in my life, I was a practicing artist. I worked in oil, I worked in pastels, I worked in pencil, and I even taught the subject in the evening division of a couple of the colleges. And somewhere or another, I think even at 89, I might be like an artist that was called Grandma Moses, and she didn't start painting until she was in her 80s, I think.
Really?
Pretty close.
Okay.
Maybe in her 70s. My mother, surprisingly enough, didn't start painting until in oil until she was 72, I believe, something like that. She became, very accomplished in her own way. Not an exceptional artist by any means, but we have people that prize her work very much. And I think I might still want to go back because I haven't done anything in this area for over 20 years.
Wow.
I mean, because life had too many other things that I wanted to examine.
Sure.
Honest to God, it's like I'm pulled in so many directions there, and I still have an interest in life. And I guess this goes back to my professor that said, what is important? It's a life that is good to lead.
Great words. Let me ask you something. When we invited you on to the podcast, and you were pretty much humbled, basically saying, why would you want me? And we were looking for some words of wisdom from you. And you said, I don't know if I can do that. Hopefully I can give something that people can take from. So a number of our kids want to know a little bit of advice. If you could do it all over, this will be like 3-part questions, so I'll take it one step at a time. What would you say? It's been a long time since you were a teenager, but what would you say, a little advice to teenagers these days, kids that are 15, 16, 17 years old that are maybe struggling figuring out who they are, or maybe they haven't had that mentor yet that believes in them? What would your be advice to teenagers?
I was posed that question as well, and I had an exchange with my wife last night in regards to this. We came up together with probably the sagest advice of all, and that is don't just jump into a decision without thinking about what the consequences can be. And I looked back and I thought, that's what I'd like to be able to convey. Is probably one of the most important things to examine in one's life at any rate. Just discipline yourself not to just jump into things without measuring what the consequences are going to be. So that was
very good advice. How about to the people that are in the part of their life where now they're married, raising kids, working on their marriage? What would be your advice to those people, maybe in their 30s right now, with young kids that are involved, and it's life is stress, work, raising kids, or whatever? What would be your advice to some of those people?
Well, in my case, I start with a cup of coffee for my wife first thing in the morning. We've been doing that ever since we've been married, and that's a starter. But more than anything else, I think it's a matter of trust. That's most important. And my wife gives this advice to many young people, and that is, look for an individual that literally thinks more of you than themselves, And it's true. I think the success of our marriage, at any rate, has been this exchange. It's sort of a give and take thing there. It has to be mutual respect. And if you don't really respect that other person there, it it really is seeds for destruction. In my case, I put my wife on a pedestal, and I can't do enough for her. And it's like saying, before I think of myself, I think of her. And it's worked out well for us.
Incredible. Now let me have you give the advice to people that are now, heading into being senior citizens themselves now. They've raised kids. Maybe they're still with their wife. Maybe their wife or their husband has passed away. And they're almost feeling at a little bit of a loss of where they are in the community, maybe heading towards retirement. What would you say to those people that you've kind of lived through that? And how do you what's your advice to them on keeping the upbeat attitude that Lester Rugg has?
I don't know if I can answer that adequately, but I have to say this. When you're working, you have identity. The toughest thing of all is when you retire, because all of a sudden it's, you've lost that concept. You have to fill it with something else there. In my case, I became interested in, senior activities, and it's become my club, so to speak.
Sure.
Some people play golf, and that's their club. Some people play bridge, and that's theirs. In this instance, I found a niche somewhere or another that, fulfills things within myself. And I don't think of myself as being, super good at anything necessarily, but I have a smattering of knowledge about just about any aspect of it that you might consider. Anyway, that's my role, and that's my feeling. The biggest thing of all is we have individuals within any community that they're shut-ins or whatever. They don't know what to do with themselves. They really don't. And this is for seniors. This is a wonderful avenue for re-examining your life and channeling things into another direction that you hadn't even possibly considered before. That's why I feel like the senior programs are so very, very important, and why I've been
everyone, Irene and her staff do such an amazing job down at the center, and you take advantage of a lot of that. What people might not know is you're a little pretty famous. You got your own TV show down at cable television. Can you tell our listeners what that show's all about?
I can do better than that. Initially, it's kind of like the personality that we've been examining here. Many years ago, it was, one of the assistant directors asked, we'd like to put on a show, and we wonder if you might be able to narrate a Christmas program for us that will appear on what's called a local television program, CAM.
Mm-hmm.
And I initially, I can't do that. And then in retrospect, you stood before students and you conveyed something in those days was a blackboard, and you expounded upon the things that they were studying. You should be able to do this too as well. And that was my initial interest in taking this particular direction there. So I've enjoyed every aspect of it, and in some ways it's been another form of creativity, and I've enjoyed every moment of it.
Yeah, and you've done a great job with that. Lester, we've got time for about 2 more questions. As you said, you're coming up on your 89th birthday. You've seen a lot in this life. You talked about serving in the Korean War. You were alive, obviously, during World War II and prior to World War II. You lived through the 60s and the 70s, and obviously as we headed into this new millennium. As you see the world through 89 years of eyes, are you optimistic for the future? Are you worried about us as people in the future? What's your take on that?
I feel like we're surrounded. We've had too many wars.
Sure.
We have too many weapons around, and we have too much violence that is accumulated. I came from a background that had a church-oriented society there, and this was part of my background. I've watched around, and there's a growing dissension between peoples in general, whether people of color or people of religious background, and it's a growing what do you call it? I guess it's in waves there somewhere. It's coloring our society. It's really a real growing distressful experience for me to see people that become more and more selfish, more and more concerned about their own needs, more and more materialistic. And I didn't come from that background myself. I always felt like there is a need for my participation and encouragement for others. Somewhere or another, this is a path that bothers me, because it's like the clouds on the horizon. They're there and they become very ominous, and it can be in our political society today, it can be the destruction of our form of life. I don't mean to be a crepe hanger or anything
No,
else.
I mean, I think people want to hear this. I mean, I don't think we put enough time into listening to people that have seen it all, and you've seen it all in many ways. And obviously, I hear from you that you're concerned of where we are right now. Do you have hope that we can turn it around?
You know, man is a resilient creature. It's amazing he's been around as long as we have. We've had wars as well. But now we're perfecting it to a point where we can annihilate ourselves as a species.
Exactly.
I can only hope that there's a measurement for all of our lives that are governed by the concept that I said, a life that is good to lead.
Well said. We're going to give you the final word. This is what we give to all of our guests. You're very humble when we asked you, to kind of give us some life tidbits and some life lessons. But I really would like you to take the final word, take as much time as you need, to our listeners. And our listeners will be people of all ages. It'll be teenagers, it'll be young parents, older parents, senior citizens. I know a lot of people down at the town hall are dying to hear this. What would be Lester's final word to our listeners about a life well lived?
Well, I have to give that some thought, too, as well. But more than anything else, I think for young people, there are two things that probably need to be measured. One of them is a personal one. Think before you, you just jump into something there. Think about what the implications can be, not just what the immediate joy might be of the moment there. You have some responsibility to yourself as an individual, and I think that this is probably one of the things. And the other one is social media has become a dominant factor in our young people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's a growing one for everyone, I think. It can't be without a smartphone these days. Anyway, it's another form of communication. We've kind of lost some of the ability to be able to, talk to people on a one-to-one basis. Myself, I think the thing that is a measure for all of us to consider the other individual. The thing about it is so often, especially with social media, what are the implications? When you put something down, it's down there for life.
Sure.
It doesn't hide by any means. You have a responsibility to other individuals. If you think about it, we're here on this earth to serve others as well as ourselves. And in my estimation, I feel like these are the two things that should would serve us well. Let's put it that way. And I hope those are the sage advices that will measure well for young people to strive for.
Well, very well said, Lester. And this is why we wanted you to come on. I know that this was challenging for you, and I'm glad you did come on. You had some great advice for all people on this, and this is a podcast that I know a lot of people are going to take a lot of good things. So first of all, I want to thank you for coming on our Youth-Centered podcast. We may have to do a follow-up of this and bring you the love of your life in here also, and we can talk to her a little bit about, her thing with the memoirs and stuff. I found pretty cool. Yeah. So
my wife spent 34 years in education. A really wonderful individual, and I would love her to come on and chat a little bit there. She probably would be very shy about this, but at any rate, I feel like for myself, this was kind of a creative moment, something else I had never done by any means, and I just felt like, got to do it, and thank you for just extending the invitation.
Absolutely, and it was great. This wraps up our podcast. I want to thank Lester Rugg for coming in. I want Lester to continue to make us smile every day at the Youth Center when he comes in. Always has a kind word for everybody. Always has a little bit of wisdom that he passes on, even though he doesn't even really do it. As we all age, and we all will, I just hope that I can have the same effect on people that Lester does. So again, Lester, thanks for coming on. And as we end up every podcast, we always say, too much passion is never enough passion.